Hello.
I can see absolutely nobody.
Yes, we're good. I think after this conversation, we'll turn up the house lights.
Yeah, sounds
That way it
good.
could be more interactive. I think that could be nice.
Okay. You ready to have a conversation?
Yes. I'm ready. Can everyone hear us?
All right, wonderful. Okay, thank you so much for making this film so that we could watch it today. I think I've now watched it multiple times because I watched it when it premiered,
Yes.
Oslo Fusion, and then I've also watched it a few times now in preparation for today, and it really feels like watching something really intimate. And I think it's interesting for me as well because I watched your first film, Agder, which is also kind of you're interviewing people and kind of sharing their stories, but in more of a maybe typical documentary format where you've got kind of the like
Talking heads.
yeah. And I think one of the questions I had when I was watching Laying Fire is what made you kind of decide to take maybe a more artistic bent to a little bit more abstract, like in the actual pictures that you're showing. Was there like a conscious decision around that?
Yes, definitely. So what Lara is referring to is my first film called Teateret, which means I made it in Germany, in Berlin, where I lived for 12 years. And Mutter Erde, if you take the words apart, it means Mother Earth. But that word Mutter Erde means topsoil, which is like the top layer of dirt. And for that film, I interviewed 5 people that live in Berlin, African diasporic femme identified people, about their matriarchal lineages, so their mothers' lines, mothers. They were all talking directly to camera. So the people that I interviewed you could see their faces, whereas this one, I decided to disembody the voices. And I was thinking a lot about the voices being disembodied, taken away from the narrators before I started making the video. So I started writing about intimacy and the erotic in like 2021. And I wrote this short story called Laying Fire. And at that time, I had just moved to Oslo, to Norway from Berlin. And we had gone into, I think, maybe the second or third lockdown for Oslo, and had been very isolated the whole time. And I was really searching for like queer community and really missing my queer family in Berlin, and not really being able to connect with anyone because everything was closed and shut down. And there's not a ton of venues anyway in Oslo.
Let alone in Kristiansand, I imagine.
Yeah, no, sure. But there's no specific femme places. And so I was trying to figure out how to connect with people in a way that wasn't physical. And so at that time I was rereading Audre Lorde's The Uses of the Erotic. Audre Lorde is a American lesbian writer, poet, activist, and they write about how the erotic can be used not as a pornographic tool, but as a way to connect with each other and create intimacy with colleagues and audience and friends and family and people on the street. And so I yeah, when I started the interview process, I knew that I wanted to just do audio interviews. I wanted people to take themselves away from the image connected to the narrator and to kind of put themselves inside of the scene.
Yeah. So allowing people to kind of step into the container rather than giving them so much of an established narrative from before.
Yeah. And when I was making the first film, I had all these amazing images, but I had such a low budget, and I made it much faster than I did this film, which that film was 45 minutes, and this was 16 minutes, and this film is probably quadruple the budget. But I had so many ideas for visual imagery connected to the oral history, the narratives, and I couldn't actualize it. And so for this video, I knew that I wanted to try to play with that imagery.
So was some of the imagery that came up in this film already things that had kind of come to you in your earlier journey with making the first film? Or
No.
No.
It all comes from the narrator. So I can't know what is going to be on screen until I listen to all of the interviews. Until I conduct the interviews and then listen to the interviews.
But it came out of a short story.
Yes. Yeah. Initially, I was writing about kind of my fantasy for just relationships and queer relationships with people, meeting new people. And so the short story is about this these two women who are best friends, and one of them has been in love with the other one for many years. Kind of unrequited love. Will they, won't they? We were talking about...
we were talking about romance earlier.
We were talking about rom-coms.
Yes.
And, will they, won't they, that whole genre. And so I wrote my own little fantasy of that. And so that's where the kind of the title comes from. It doesn't exactly bleed over into the film, except for the intimacy between two people. I knew that I wanted to explore what that intimacy could look like between two actors. And
that because you've got three people that are kind of speaking, but you've only got two on the screen, so it does create that kind of separation. But I mean, how scripted was it then? Because this was a studio session or like multiple sessions, I assume, with these two actors. And how did you kind of like lay out your vision for? Because I think kind of physical intimacy can be quite hard to script, I assume.
Well, I had a storyboard. So I did the interviews first many months before and listened to them many times, and then came up with the images, and then created a storyboard and worked with my cinematographer. And then the actors and I couldn't get an intimacy coordinator, so I just went to like crash course intimacy coordinating class myself. And I worked for an actor for like as an actor for like 20 years before that. So I know how to work with actors and kind of what they need. And so we had several sessions where we just got to know each other, and luckily the two actors know each other from around town, the queer scene in Oslo. So they didn't have much trouble getting to be physical with each other, but we had a lot of rules. That's what working with intimacy, especially when you're working barely clothed, you have to have a lot of rules, and it has to be choreographed, has to be highly choreographed. It can't just be like, now kiss, now touch each other. No, it has to be like, you put your right hand there and your left hand there, and that's just safer for everyone, even if it feels robotic. But luckily the actors, they took to each other very well. And interestingly enough, I I had this storyboard and I had everything all mapped out, and almost all of the movements that I directed ended up on the cutting room floor. A lot of these movements are what they were doing in between takes. So every time they're laughing, every time they're joking or stroking each other or smiling at each other, that's all. My cinematographer is a genius, and she just kept the camera running the whole time. The whole day she kept the camera running. And yeah, when I watched back the footage, I was like, no, it's terrible. It's terrible. and then I was like, oh, wait, there's all these little moments of them just being natural. And that's most of the moments that you see. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how much intimacy can kind of spring from a certain spontaneity, I guess. Even when you're trying to guide things.
Yes, yeah. And they were just telling each other stories, and yeah, that created a really intimate set as well. Yeah.
So you were reading Audre Lorde while you were while the idea for this was germinating, and I think like in Teateret, for example, you're talking about like lineages, and here as well to a certain extent, the people who are being interviewed are talking about the way that their family has kind of affected the way they live their life and so on. And I wonder like what the lineage of this movie is for you, like who are the people that you had to kind of meet or talk to or listen to for this to happen. I mean, Audre Lorde's obviously one.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it was a lot of talking with and listening to myself and my own queer journey. I identify with what some of the narrators were saying, a lot kind of living in between or both worlds, being bisexual, not being accepted. I also wanted to and decided to kind of trace my own family lineage to find the kind of queer icons. So I interviewed my dad and my grandmother and kind of asked them about the people in our family that, was kind of secret or hush-hush around. And that was really interesting. It was also kind of painful to revisit some of those stories because they were family members that have been kind of cast out of the family. Like the one narrator said that family member who left, and you never knew, as a kid, you didn't understand why they were leaving, why they were different, why they were shunned, and then finding out later that they weren't accepted, or that was your like queer ancestor. And then also thinking about some of my early gay, mainly lesbian icons around me growing up that I didn't know. Some of my mom's friends, because she had quite an eclectic group of friends, and how my mom, even though we didn't really talk about their sexualities, how she was very caring and gentle with them, and I saw that in a space where I saw other adults being quite violent with some of these queer and trans adults that I grew up with, and using quite harsh, this is in the 2000s, and I remember having one of my mom's friends who came out as trans, and I had known formerly him all my life growing up as a child, and then came out as trans to her, and I saw in real time how my mom cared for her later on, and how other adults were very lazy and careless with things like pronouns. And this is way before all of this, it's in the popular culture and popular lexicon.
Yeah, so this type of care kind of reverberates through time because you got that kind of growing up and being able to see that around you. Yeah. And a film like this might not have been possible without those early experiences.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Yeah. I mean, it is really interesting, this thing of the queer icons that we had around us growing up, but didn't necessarily know, like, before you're old enough to really understand what's going on around you. Because I'm sure that there's a lot of people who can relate to, for example, this story about, like, the brother who just leaves, or, like, the family member that's a little bit outside of things. And the films that you're making are, at least for me, I feel, is like a way to add to the archive, to not allow those people and those stories to disappear in the way that they have. And earlier on we were talking a little bit about oral histories, which I feel like film and, like, audio are a way of bringing those to a wider audience, I suppose. And I wondered, like, what's your relationship to archiving, and why are you drawn towards, for example, film as a way of documenting certain stories?
Well, I never thought about it until this moment, but my mom was a research librarian. And so it was so funny, I never thought about it, but she was a hoarder. And she kept every newspaper clipping and magazine, book, little article, artwork, just tiny little things everywhere, stuffed in books. And she had a massive collection of books as well. Introduced me to all the Black literature icons that I know today from a very young age. And so she was always collecting things, and they seemed important to her, but they weren't important in, like, larger society. You know, I would go to school and hear a totally different history than the one I was being taught at home, or, you know, I would hear the history that didn't quite match up. I remember my grandfather, great-grandfather, he would tell me about how he would say that he was a slave when he was a boy. That's what he said. He said that he grew up on a plantation. And that's the story that, you know, he told us all of my childhood. And this was a man definitely born in the 1800s, late 1800s. And then died maybe in the 90s, late 90s. And I remember going to college and having a course on something. It couldn't have been around the transatlantic slave trade because I went to art school, so I don't know what we were talking about. But the professor was saying something. I said, "Oh yeah, my great-grandfather grew up on a plantation. He was a slave when he was a boy," and everyone in the class laughed. And the professor was like, "Jessica, that's absolutely not possible. Like, slavery ended in, you know, because, you know, slavery ended on this date.
Legally, yeah. So
then, you know, slavery's finished. Everyone's free, and there's no more enslaved people." And we know now that that's not true, but we didn't have film and media and alternative histories. It was just like history books written by, you know, old dead white men, very old books. And so I remember really questioning my my great-grandfather, who was long dead by that point, and just being like, was he a liar? I just remember going back to my dorm room and feeling really confused, and I didn't tell my family about it. Yeah, anyway, so your question, I've just always been really fascinated in, like, storytelling, person to person, oral history, passing the word really. And, you know, we have a very rich history of that across the entire diaspora. And I was just watching the film just now, I started thinking a lot about emotional memory and how maybe some of the memories that the narrators are talking about, like, one says, my mother was a shaman. And, maybe if you asked their mother, they wouldn't say it exactly in that way. But I think there's something really important about emotional memory. And I think that's something that is, often overlooked.
Yeah, like not just about facts and figures and categorizing, but also the experiences and the feelings that have happened.
Yeah, and film was just a way to, like the medium film, video was just a way to archive the stories more permanently, because I noticed that the stories, they weren't being, they're not written down, and they're passed on orally, and some of the oral traditions are disappearing. So I wanted to have a way to, kind of make more permanent.
Document. Yeah. Do you have a lot of experiences of oral storytelling, like oral history and oral storytelling throughout your childhood and experiences with your family?
I mean, it was never like a set ritual. Like I know some families and some friends I have from the continent, they have like these very set rituals, but it was just telling stories around and stories that would be passed down, and then they would become bigger and bigger and bigger, more grandiose.
As time went on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because my dad's Nigerian from, which is a West African country, and I think there is something there with across the sort of African diaspora, there being it's quite common to have an oral storytelling, and I noticed that when I'm when I'm reading also stories from different parts of the world, and like we were talking about Toni Morrison earlier, for example, and the most recent book of hers I read was Tar Baby, which, I mean, it takes its title from like a Brer Rabbit tale, which is a type of kind of folk tale, or with Brer Rabbit is kind of like a trickster figure, I would say. And then I think like in a lot of West African countries you have like Anansi, and I love that there's so many of these connections across, and how, I mean, apropos this starting off as a short story, like a fictional story, like how much information we can also pass on through fiction or fairy tales or folk tales, which is just as important as being able to like write things down with statistics.
Definitely. And this is something that I really love about and this is why I interview people from across the entire African diaspora, but that live in the same place, because we're so much more connected than we might think. For my first film, I interviewed 5 people from 5 different countries, 3 different continents, and the stories were so similar. I mean, really down to the phrases and expressions that parents would say to the children, that grandparents would say to the children, down to the what are they called, non-verbal speech patterns, these like, or that Norwegians have. I love that one. But I love all these non-verbal speech patterns, and it's just amazing to hear that some of them are the same.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing I've known. I mean, with this film as well, because they're all based in Norway, I think, but like they're all from kind of very different places, different family backgrounds. But again, there's all of these commonalities and differences, which is what I like too, is that like when you're choosing such a wide array of people to speak to, you get to really go into the nuances. And it's like, yes, there are commonalities across the kind of like African or Black diaspora, but there's also specificities from culture to culture, which is getting away from this kind of like representation for representation's sake, where you just have like the token, whatever it is. and it just, it
Dilutes.
grows. It dilutes because I think that, and I wonder that as well with your filmmaking, because you've mainly focused on Black femmes, and in this one more specifically on Black queer femmes.
Yes.
Although I think there are Black queer femmes in the previous.
Yeah.
But like, I think there can be a lot of tension when trying to represent, or like I don't know if you would call it representing, but you're making a film that's about this specific group of people, and then people come in and they're like, now I know about the Black femme experience. And I think I wonder, is that a pressure that you felt at all when you were making the film? And also, like, if you had any strategies that you put into place to not accommodate the external eye.
Yeah. No, not at all. I don't feel a lot of pressure.
No.
No, because I don't really think about white audience like that. I just don't.
Yeah.
I don't think about it like that. I try to be as true to the narrators, the people who are giving me the interviews, true to their stories. I try to make them as comfortable as possible. And I, always send them the transcript and what is going to be in the film. And I send it to them before. And I actually, for the first film, I had 6 people. And then I made the film, and then I showed it, and then one of the people said that they were uncomfortable with their story being in it, so I had to remake the film.
Like once everything was already kind of, wow, yeah, that must have been a lot of work.
Yeah, yeah, and it was painful.
Yeah.
Because I could see they were in pain.
Yeah.
Because they felt like you're talking about things that are very intimate, your family history, and they felt like they were disrespecting their family, which I understand. But so I just try to be true to them. And I was cognizant that I did not want a film about Black queer sexuality to be all violent and bad, and that it's you have the story about in Kenya, you can, during a certain time period, you can be jailed or killed, and right now it's at least 120 countries across the world where same-sex partnership is banned, and there were hundreds of anti-LGBTQIA plus bills, ordinances, laws issued in the past couple of years, mainly by my home country. So we do have that. And I couldn't escape that. I wanted to make something that was, I wouldn't say uplifting, but showed a softer side. But you're always going to have, But so I am aware, I am cognizant of not focusing on too much violence, because that's what's always perpetuated in the media. About our stories.
Yeah. But also kind of striking the balance and not making it too sanitized at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's interesting that you say, it's sad that someone felt that they had to pull out. But because I worked on a project which was kind of also documenting Black queer people in Norway's experiences, and I had a lot of trouble actually getting hold of people who would say yes, because people are there is a lot of shame, and there is a lot of like fear of being of having your story this accessible. Yeah, that too. Like a lot of the people that ended up doing it were people I already had pre-existing relationships with, because there was a certain amount of trust.
Yeah.
And do you feel like when you're working with Black queer people, Black femmes specifically, there's like an extra level of care that you have to
for sure.
extend?
For sure.
Yeah.
I try to have at least 2-3 meetings prior to getting the interview. And actually this was, to answer your question from earlier, I said, the decision to not have talking head to camera was, you know, artistic choice, but also, and I'm just remembering this, there was something about, you know, I'm speaking to the narrator, is what I call the people I interview, and we're having a lovely conversation, and then I pull out the camera, and they're frozen. They're frozen, yeah, there's this conversation. I think we talked about this once between the filmmaker artist Arthur Jaffa and the writer theorist Bell Hooks, where they talk about how the camera lens, the camera gaze, is always a white gaze, no matter what. If you pick up a camera, even if you're a black person, it's going to be a white gaze behind the camera, and how to disrupt that. Because, and they say because camera lenses have so often been used for surveillance tactics, and for investigation, and it's never been quite a neutral space to be filmed. And to, you know, some people feel like they're under interrogation. So, I mean, you know, I have way more no's than I have yeses. I wanted more than 3 people for this, but these were 3 that said yes. Many more said no. Yeah. Many more said no. And the people that say yes, I'm always very surprised at their candidacy, that how much information they're willing to give. But, you know, some of them, there was a person from the last film. I asked her, she was from Benin, West Africa, and I asked her many times about the rituals that she you know, did as a child with her family, and she was just like, I can't say them out loud to the camera. Yeah.
Because this isn't for, like,
exactly,
people outside of.
Yeah. So, and, you know, I'm not in the bodies of the narrators, so I feel like, wow, you're being so candid and forthcoming and giving me so many intimate moments from your history. But they could also be guarding, and they should be. It shouldn't, you know, they shouldn't give everything. And yeah, it was. It's always a difficult negotiation, because I've been an interviewer for a long time, but a filmmaker only for 7 years, and I noticed that when I would interview people, particularly black femmes, like I said, they would kind of, you know, maybe close up if there's a camera involved. And also, if you're making a film in, you know, documentary style, one of the quiet violences is you have to ask them to repeat things. And so that was something that I didn't have to do as much when I just audio recorded, because the interviews that I did for this film were just audio, and the ones for my first film were video and audio. And so when the narrators were on video, I would have to say, can you repeat that story about that violent experience you experienced again, like 3, 4, 5 times, to get it perfectly for the camera, to get the audio correct in the room. And yeah, it was stressful. I don't know how documentary filmmakers do it. When you see these documentaries and people are telling their painful stories over and over again, I don't know.
Yeah, what are the ethics of?
Exactly.
Yeah. Is there anything that you had to drop because you were just like, it's been enough now?
So many things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so many things. Yeah.
That makes sense. I mean,
yeah, this is the what I'm still learning, the ethical negotiation. I think that's why, another reason why I decided to take away the faces as well, and put in other images. Yeah.
Kind of making decisions that are not only about making the best art possible, but also navigating like the participants as human beings who have like feelings and emotions.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And now for my PhD research, I'll be working with the I think it's called the Center for Ethics and Humanitarian Services or something in Norway to learn more ethical practices, because it's really important. And this is something that I was never taught in art school, in theater school, never. You don't learn about ethics. Maybe now you do, but
maybe.
Yeah, it was really, especially in theater school, it was like kiss him for a scene.
End of story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or push her to the ground, choke her. For a lot of I study classical theater, so Shakespeare, Ibsen, all of that, and a lot of the scenes are quite violent, and so we had to reproduce that violence with no consideration for the actor's body or their personal history. Yeah, that was also, I think, kind of taboo. It was like, you're an actor. You need to
rise above it. Or,
put those feelings to the side.
Being professional.
Yes.
Yeah, there's no consideration of like consent or no form of being trauma informed in that work.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of friends who work in kind of different sections of performing arts, and hearing kind of conversations about also the hierarchy of, for example, like the director and the like, 'cause if they tell you to do as an actor, if they tell you to do the thing, you should do the thing, regardless of kind of how much that might take from you. I guess it sounds like in your role making these films, you've had to reflect a lot around your position. Definitely. In terms of the participants, and like how much power you have in for example, asking to retell the story again and again, or during the filming of this, on set we had created this really cozy, intimate vibe, and I forgot that I was the director many times. The cinematographer had to remind me. She was like, and what shot is next? I had to be like, oh yes, I'm the one steering this ship. Yeah. Because I would just get caught up with the actor. So it's a really interesting bridge to walk, to be in the in between stages, and then also I have to be honest, to see your vision of something you've never seen, to see my vision of something I've never seen play out in front of me. It was just so beautiful to witness. It was really beautiful to witness, and so that also I had to, I felt like it was my child self, my teenage self, seeing something that I would have needed at that time. I mean, that's exactly what I felt when I watched this. I was just like, oh, imagine this being available when I was like 12. That would have made a big difference, I think. Yeah,
because even now, I can't think of really the shows. There was this American show called Noah's Ark.
Yes.
It was
came out like early 2000.
There was the L Word, which was a show.
Which American some of you may know.
Yeah, that show was wild. And then around the same time, maybe before, there was a black show called Noah's Ark. Yeah. It was mainly gay men. Yes. It was all gay men.
Pretty much black gay men. Yeah. But the same sort of like kind of daytime drama format.
Evening drama.
Yeah, evening drama.
Yeah. So still never seen any black femme.
No, I mean, yeah, because the first thing I thought about was Moonlight, for example. But again, that's not black femmes.
No, the film Moonlight.
No, and there's what's the one? No, I don't remember it. It's I think it's based in Kenya, actually. Yes.
Ghana.
Rafiki?
Yeah. Was it not?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm thinking of a different one.
I don't remember. But it's Rafiki that's the film anyway. But again, it does have a lot of violence in it, and that's often, it's like you don't get the one without the other.
No.
I feel like we're getting to write a curriculum for like how to make films about Black queer femme people right now. Like,
definitely
less violence.
Yes.
Be aware of your power when getting people to talk about traumatic stories.
Yes. And you know, it's this question of intersectionality. You talked about tokenism. You know, if you see a Black woman, she's not also going to be a Black gay woman.
Can't have both at the same time. That's too much. It's too complicated.
So you don't often see these different intersections.
Yeah. And I mean, again, that's when you have 3 participants here or like 5 participants in the other film, you also see that like it's not one thing to be a Black woman or to be a Black femme, because that was also really enjoyable with like especially Mutter. There's like they all have quite different relationships to their gender, for example, and the way that they move through life.
And everyone.
Yeah, like as
everybody
does, but which is not necessarily depicted for everyone. Or like now in Laying Fire, when one of the narrators is talking about the experience of being bisexual and like talking about biphobia, basically, like how often I haven't really heard that addressed so directly most of the time when we're talking about sort of queerness, Black queerness, this feeling of being, because it really is that thing of being in between. Like I'm getting it both from my family and from the people in the queer community who you know purportedly should be actually supportive in this situation.
Well, I mean, you know, it comes from a lineage of wanting acceptance and not to be an outcast and a further outsider in a society that already deems you as an outsider. I'm thinking about so many of my queer icons that were in marriages with men because they had to be. Thinking about the writer Zora Neale Hurston, Floridian writer, who was queer but also was married to a man for most of her life, and not just for societal pressure or for not aesthetics, but just how everything looks, but for protection. You know, there was a certain time period where you needed to have that sort of protection, to be married, to not be a single woman, and definitely not to be a queer woman.
I didn't know Zora was queer.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You know, I didn't know that Angela Davis was queer until like last year.
Oh. Wow.
Yeah. It's not like upfront when people talk about them. I feel like James Baldwin, for example, if he hadn't put it in his work the way he did,
Lord.
People wouldn't.
No.
It does. Yeah.
No.
And again, it's about how is the archive framed as well. Like, it's not only about having the work and about talking about the people, but it's like, how do you talk about them? Do you talk about them in their fullness? Because that's something I noticed that often doesn't happen. I remember I think it was the film that they made out of James Baldwin's I'm Not Your Negro.
Yes, I'm Not Your
someone
Negro.
did the introduction and didn't mention his queerness at all, which I found very interesting, because how do you really talk about what kind of figure he is in the Black canon without addressing that?
Wow.
It's
No.
yeah.
Paradoxical.
Yeah, I feel like it is. And that's why it's so important with the kind of archiving that you're doing. Let me see. We started at 6:30 and it's now 7:15.
I was going to talk about someone, if a bit,
please.
in that same vein, who I was going to show a few videos of, but there was a woman named Gladys Bentley, who was she was a drag performer in the 30s and 40s in the U.S. during the Harlem Renaissance. So the Harlem Renaissance was this surge of culture, literary, music, food, dance, poetry in Harlem, New York. And the Harlem Renaissance was sparked by the Great Migration. So the Great Migration was basically an influx of Black Americans from the southern states up to the northern states, because after slavery was abolished, people thought that they would have new opportunities in the South for jobs and healthcare and just be treated as equals. But that didn't happen. After slavery was abolished, basically all the southern states started making all of these laws that made them less than human. So it was like you could no longer be enslaved, but you couldn't vote, you couldn't work for this amount of money, and all these things. So a lot of Black American families moved to northern cities like Chicago and Philadelphia and New York. And it's not like these cities were great welcoming havens, actually, for large groups of Black Americans coming into their cities. People weren't very welcoming to them. So they had to create their own little mini townships inside of big cities. So that's, how they created this little township in Harlem inside of New York, because they couldn't find housing, they couldn't find work opportunities. So they started their own clubs, speakeasies, which is another kind of club, usually open all night. And this was during Reconstruction in America. This was during Prohibition, where alcohol was banned in America. And so the speakeasies provided a way to serve illegal alcohol and have these kind of secret clubs all over Harlem. And there were over 500. I have a map that I want to show. But anyway, Gladys Bentley was a woman who was a singer, and she also performed in drag. And I didn't know her name. When you think of the Harlem Renaissance, you think of Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston and all of these people, but I had never heard of Gladys Bentley. And she performed very raunchy, sexually explicit songs about her sexual interactions with men and women, which was not exactly taboo inside the world of the Harlem Renaissance. Lots of people were doing that. We just, don't hear about it so much now. But she was a drag king. And then later in life, she, found Christianity and kind of revoked that whole...
She did a Prince.
Yeah. She revoked that whole lifestyle and then kind of went on the straight and narrow before she died.
It's interesting how that happens with a lot of people. I don't know if it's their mortality that kind
Definitely.
of hits.
Definitely. But yeah, I have a video of her singing that I wanted to share.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great.
Mac and then... There you go. Yeah, if you can put it here, and then I'll remove mine. Your computer over here.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 120, It was working earlier.
Yes. Oh, we just plugged it in. It's
Okay.
gonna work. Just needs a moment.
Tech changeover is always a bit dicey.
Mhm. Okay. Maybe we can also turn up the light. Or we need it to be a bit dark to show the
Turn on the lights.
a little bit,
Yeah.
so we can see the audience.
Then I need your help, Tina. But why is this not working now?
It was working so perfectly earlier.
Mm.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, something's happening.
Excellent.
There we go. There's the light.
This is Gladys Bentley.
Now I can see the wonderful.
You see her?
Yes, I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Do you all see her, or do we need to
Yeah.
move the? Okay.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
And
Oh my gosh.
yeah,
Yeah.
pretty dapper.
Right.
And this is a map, a nightclub map of Harlem that I found from 1932. And then what I, in the documentary that I was watching, well, there's actually a show on Netflix called High on the Hog. That is an amazing show about food across America, but how food is connected to Black history and culture and American history. But anyway, they were saying that there were 500 speakeasies dotted around this little map of Harlem. I can't remember. I mean, I can't imagine there being that many. But she performed a lot at Club Hacha. Which is a great name.
Nothing happens before 2 a.m. Ask for Clarence.
Oh,
I love these little descriptions.
yeah. Oh, look at that. There she's on the map. Gladys Bentley wears a tuxedo and a high hat.
Yeah. And tickles the ivories.
Yeah. So now I'll show a video of her singing. This was closer to her death. This is after she converted to Christianity. So she's singing a song that is not as raunchy or sexually explicit as some of her other ones, but you could still
Damn
hear
it.
her. Let's see if the sound works.
And you're Gladys Bentley, is that right?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
This show is You Bet Your Life on American television in the 50s, and the interviewer is Groucho Marx.
I've
Yeah.
neglected you, Gladys, but it isn't often you get a charming lad from Guatemala.
Right.
Now, where are you from, Glad?
I'm from Port of Spain, Trinidad.
Do you have a job, Gladys?
Yes, I'm an entertainer. I sing and play for a living in nightclubs all over the country. And I just finished a book called If This Be Sin.
Well, what is it about? Is it about geometry?
My life story.
Life story. You're the Gladys Bentley.
Yeah, that's
I thought your name sounded vaguely familiar. Gladys, how long have you been singing in nightclubs around the country?
For about 40 years.
What kind of songs do you sing?
Well, I do all kind of songs.
Could you sing something for us right now?
Well, I have about 500 at hand. What would you like to hear?
Could you sing the whole 500? I don't care.
If you
Sing
have
anything
time.
you'd like. What would you like to sing?
I could do, if you have a small piano or something, I could do Them Their Eyes.
Suppose we had a large piano, what could you do? Huh?
Well, I could do maybe somebody else's eyes.
Well, NBC throws their money around like glue, and we just happen to have a portable piano backstage. George. Well, what are you going to sing, Gladys? Maybe the orchestra could join in
I'm
with
going
you.
to try to do Them Their Eyes. For
Them
you.
their eyes. Watch that stool there, huh?
I'm trying to.
So she said, I don't know if you could hear the audio's a bit garbled. She said she just wrote a book called This Life of Sin. So she's talking about it's kind of a tell-all of her sinful past. with women.
Okay.
Yeah, and now she's on the straight and narrow, and she's singing a song called "Them Their Eyes."
Did he ask if it was about geometry?
Geometry? Did he?
I don't know. It sounded like that.
Yeah, I
Did he?
didn't catch exactly what he said.
It's interesting because he says, "Where are you from?" and she says Trinidad. She's not from Trinidad. I don't know why she's.
Is she just inventing a past for herself?
I guess so.
Yeah.
I guess so. Yeah.
That'll be something. Fell in love with you the first time I looked into them there eyes. Got a cute little way of flirt with them there eyes. You make me oh so happy. You make me blue. All in no stalling and a great big way for you. Jumping, you started something with them there eyes. Watch out, brown eyes, if you're wise. They sparkle, they bubble. Get you in a whole lot of trouble, yes, baby. Them there you make me oh so happy. You make me blue. Falling no stalling and a great big way for you.
Give it up, gal.
Jumping, you started something with them there eyes. Watch out, brown eyes, you're the wise. Sparkle, bubble, get you in a whole lot of trouble there, baby. Them there eyes, yes, baby. Them there eyes.
I don't know who that man is that she brought with her.
Hype man.
Yeah, I guess
Hello Fresh verdt pengene?
so sorry.
A little bit of sponsored
These
content.
YouTube ads, they're so vicious. They're so vicious, the YouTube ads.
Yeah, they'll catch
It's
you.
really so rude.
Yes.
It's crazy.
Yeah. No, that's true. HelloFresh is in my mailbox like at least every 3
Really?
months. Yeah. But what
yeah.
a voice. What a set of
Yeah.
piano playing skills.
But you see how the audience, so this is around the time of, I guess the performers would be Ella Fitzgerald. I'm trying to think of the black women performers that the audience may have seen. This audience may have seen. This predates, obviously, Nina Simone. But who else besides Ella? I'm trying to think the other one's names. But
was Billie Holiday before?
Billie Holiday, for sure.
Yeah.
But you see how the audience is like, there's so much laughter.
Yeah, they're not used to the kind of levity of the performance.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But I just know that I didn't see too much funny happening. Yeah. Gladys Bentley.
Gladys Bentley.
Yeah.
I think I wish there'd been more suits involved.
Yeah. I would love to read the book.
Yeah,
see.
that'd be interesting. Reformed
Yes.
sinner.
I want to hear about the stories that she's writing as a sinner.
Yeah.
You had somebody?
Yeah. So I was going to do. Well, I had a talk about a Nigerian author. I think it was last year, or maybe the year. I don't know. The last 4 years have been a complete blur, so it could have happened any point between 2020 and now. But their name is Akwaeke Emezi, and I've spoken a little bit about them to you before. But they are also Igbo, which is where my dad he's Igbo, which is one of the kind of ethnic groups in Nigeria. And they've written a lot about like Igbo spirituality and cosmology, and their relationship to gender in a way. But obviously, like, this is a little bit difficult because when you're coming from a kind of worldview that is completely outside of the like Western kind of Eurocentric way of thinking about things, the language, like speaking English to try to describe these things doesn't really work.
No.
So they're in Ogbanje, which is it's a type of almost, I guess, spirit, which is genderless. And if we were to talk about it here, a lot of people would say like they're queer or they're trans or but that's not necessarily, I think, the language that they would use to describe themselves. All of that to say that I was doing research for this talk that I was gonna hold, and I found a clip from, I think, is it in, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You may have to restart it
To
to refresh the page, the whole page.
Yeah. So
One Eastern.
I think this is from, I want to say like 70s, 80s. This is the southeast of Nigeria, and I'll just.
Who has undergone considerable change in the post-war years is Area Scatter. After 7 months and 7 days in isolation, he threw up his job as a male civil servant to become a female entertainer. He plays a thumb piano, which he always carries with him, acting the traditional role of entertainer of audiences from street urchins to royalty.
Like much Igbo music in the East, my song is tinged with some bitterness and black humor. It's about the most miserable man in the world, who suffered because he was smaller than anyone else. But one day, at the market, he sees a man even tinier than he is. After that, he is happy. Happy to know there is someone even worse off than himself.
He must have a machine. What is the kind of what I can Mommy, what happened when them on Auntie,
Så mange hoteller. Så lite tid.
No!
Nå er det lett.
Phew. A little bit of free product placement for hotels.com.
Yeah.
I don't know where the pointer
You
is.
press the
Oh, there
escape
it
button.
is.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
Okay. So yeah, I found this clip while I was doing research work for this talk I was going to hold, and I think my mind was a little bit blown because I'm like, I've grown up, you know, with a very Nigerian dad watching like Nollywood, which is the Nigerian version of Hollywood. And so like this type of setting is very familiar to me, but not with this aspect of like queerness and gender fluidity. And I've been doing a lot of work on like researching about where I'm from, where my dad's from, and realizing that a lot of the things that we're just coming to now in like a European context have been existent, right, for centuries.
Pre-Christianity.
Yeah. This like what did my dad's culture look like pre-colonialism, or even before kind of the modern proliferation of information, because the West's kind of like cultural dominance has been an ongoing thing for such a long time, and it still is a thing now, where like we had indigenous religions that have been squashed down and suppressed because Christianity became the kind of dominant mode, and it meant that queerness in all kinds of forms was criminalized. But like one of the things that used to I grew up in the UK, as you may hear, but one of the things I noticed when my dad would speak to me and my siblings is that he would often mix up pronouns.
You hear in the video, it says that she carries on the way to his.
Yeah.
And in the same sentence, they say she and he.
Yeah. But like, because Igbo, the language, doesn't have gendered pronouns. So like, I never realized when I was, because I don't speak Igbo fluently. My dad would always speak it, but like, it's when you're growing up outside of the place where the culture is, like it's hard to learn those things. But I was always kind of like it was just I didn't even think about it that much. Like he would just, you know, mix up pronouns here and there. My brother, me, whatever, mix everything up. And it wasn't until I kind of grew older that I realized that like, oh yeah, it's because you literally don't have gendered pronouns in your mother tongue. But here I am like, oh, I'm non-binary, like, you know, 2024, like, get with the times. And he's grown up speaking a language where that isn't even a thing.
Wow.
So I think it's just been a really interesting, and it still is a really interesting journey, just being like kind of also finding these little, you know, pieces of gold in the archive where I'm like, oh yeah, you know, we've been here. It's not new.
Yeah.
Because this is an artist who was invited to like a royal, you know.
Yeah, because there were no captions, so I know it's sometimes hard. But the artist name is
Area Scatter. Yeah, which is it's kind of like in Nigerian pidgin, scatter is like something. If you really like created a big mess and everyone's like a bit like all over the place, so it's like area scatters, like someone who like makes everything but yeah, so like this was someone who was popular enough to be invited back to a royal royal family basically. And I was trying to and I was trying to find out more about this person. It was just like just like this mysterious figure that just like disappeared into the forest one day, literally. And I'm just like, okay, I don't.
This video is so interesting to me because you know, the reverence which everyone has in the room is kind of like this curiosity mixed with, you know, kind of astonishment, but then also you see at the end the king and queen are quite pleased with the performance. I also wonder if, because I know that people who were, you know, in between genders or genderless or two-spirit, as a lot of the indigenous tribes where I'm from call people. I know in a lot of cultures they were revered as the all-knowing. They were kind of the people who would communicate with children. They could have this kind of way of translating between children and adults. They were also sometimes the medicine people. And it's interesting to see this kind of more contemporary reading of them as performer, because I often feel like a lot of times these kind of characters are relegated to performance.
Yeah, I mean, definitely.
And I wonder
right
if that was
till
it's
now.
a survival skill for them.
Yeah, if you don't fit. I mean, a lot of the misfits kind of go into art. That's been a thing. That's just been a thing. It's an international truth.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Destroyed the room in 1 second.
Yeah. How many people here are in arts?
How many people here are misfits?
Yeah. No, but I just, there was something about this video that really like called to me, because I was like, wow. And then I think also the mysteriousness of like trying to find out more about Arias Gata, and it was literally like they just walked into the forest one day and they were never heard of again, and I was like, what does that mean? Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, Saida Hartman talks about questioning the archive, interrogating the archive. And what she writes about is the archive that we've been given. The archive that we've been given through education and questioning that and trying to decide what is useful or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what you said about your great-grandfather, for example, because if we're going to take all the things that we're taught as truth, it erases what we know to be true. Because the official archive isn't a neutral thing.
Not at all.
Somebody's decided what gets to be there and what doesn't. And someone's always telling a story.
Yeah, this is, I'm very new to Norway, and 3 years, and I've been learning about the different indigenous people of Norway, specifically Samisk. And, my daughter in school, she's barely taught. I mean, really very barely taught about a more sanitized version of these people and how they live amongst us. And it directly clashes with what I hear from people on the streets or the protests I see in the news media or the protests I attend on behalf of different Samisk people. And it directly mirrors a lot of the sanitization of different histories in the U.S. as well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the parallels are very clear. Even to like the fornorskning, like the kind of politics of wiping out a whole culture, like the kind of residential school type of situation. Like there's so many parallels, and because I've lived in Norway 10 years now, 10, 11, somewhere between, and I've experienced exactly the same. It's this very like hush hush. We don't really talk about it, and when we do talk about it, we do it in like the nice way, which is very strange. Because I think it also contributes to the kind of myth of Norwegian exceptionalism. Like this, colonialism has nothing to do with us. We haven't had anything to do with that at all. And I mean, also goes because when Denmark, Norway existed, they had colonies, right? Which no one really wants to talk about.
At all. One of the things that I brought, if we have time for maybe one more, for, and then maybe we could hear from some of you, was, I brought one contemporary person, and I wanted to try to find someone Scandinavian, but I don't know if anyone knows, and I'm definitely going to say the name incorrectly, Jani Toivola, Finnish member of parliament, the first black member of the Finnish parliament. It was a black gay man about 4 years ago. And they helped pass the Finnish Marriage Equality Act. And Finland was the last country in Scandinavia to get that act passed. Yeah, that I recently learned about. So this is present day history. I have a video about him. But I'd never heard of him before.
No, me neither. I mean, I feel like I rarely hear what's going on with Finland.
Jani Toivola. Yeah, if somebody knows Finnish and how to say that.
Telee kaikista eniten sellaiset.
This may be the last one.
Just nyt mua ehkä puhuttelee kaikista eniten sellaiset niin kuin miehenä olemisen kysymykset. Mä ajattelen, että se jotenkin joku semmoinen miehenä olemisen ihanne on ollut yksi semmoinen kipupiste omassa elämässä tosi pitkään. Joku semmoinen muotti, mihin on tosi vaikea ollut ahtautua ja silti on ollut jollain tavalla se vaade siitä, että siihen pitäisi vaan yrittää itsensä tunkea. Nyt mulla on semmoinen olo, että tapahtuu ihan valtavasti muutosta ja myös se semmoinen kuva miehestä ja miehenä olemisesta muuttuu ja moninaistuu ja siihen tulee ihan valtavasti uusia sävyjä. Mua kiinnostaa tosi paljon se semmoinen miesten välinen ystävyys ja intiimiys. Miten miehet uskaltaa ja voi olla avoimia ja herkkiä toinen toisillensa. Tai miten toinen mies voi ystävyydessä olla lähellä toista miestä myös ehkä fyysisesti tai koskettaa tai halata tai ottaa syliin tai pyytää päästä syliin tai silittää toista. Sellainen uskallus ihan aidosti tulla lähellä, olisi sitten keholla tai sanoilla. Että mitä kaikkea uutta se voi avata siihen niin kuin miehenä olemiseen ja miehenä olemisen erilaisiin muotoihin ja niihin rooleihin.
Yeah, I was really surprised to hear about 2011, so way more than a few years ago. Yeah.
What is
first
time?
black MP. That's when he joined the parliament.
I've never heard of him. From pop star to politician.
Yeah. And he said that there were many gay members in parliament already, no black members. And so then they all just banded together to get the Equality Act passed. And he was only in the parliament for 3 years, and he got it passed in his second year.
Efficient.
Yes. Yeah, but this is living history. I think a lot of times when and this is why I wanted to make Laying Fire and talk about the kind of contemporary histories and get the contemporary oral histories of people living today, people younger than me. All the narrators, 2 out of 3 of them are younger than me. Because when we think about, queer history and violence, a lot of times we think about something that's 30, 40, 50, 100 years old. Or when we think about colonial violence or how, these systems are still replicated and being reproduced today, a lot of times we think it's old news, but this is living history now, today.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're making all the connections from then till now. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left. Do we want to try opening it up? If anybody has anything that wants to be communicated, we can have a few minutes of awkward silence while you think about it.
Yeah, I love awkward silence.
Yeah.
Truly, totally okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully Tina got a photo of us.
A question. Yeah.
Well, it's more like a commentary. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the very poetic film, and also from sharing your personal stories. And for me, that's been an eye-opener tonight. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, really thank you for the movie, and thank you for the talk. It was a very sensual experience, and I really enjoyed this form of storytelling that you presented. I was wondering, where do you plan on going next? What's your next step?
So I just became a new PhD fellow at the Oslo Art Academy. Yeah, just like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, now I have 3 years of research, artistic research, and I'll start the process of making a new film now as well. Yeah. So I'll be traveling all over the Nordics, like to all of the Nordic countries, and then elsewhere doing research and doing more interviews. Yeah, so I'm really excited.
So
hopefully I'll be
am
back at Kristiansand, in Kristiansand as well. Yeah.
Mm.
How? And Lara, did you want to say what you have going on?
What do I have going on? I'm doing a curatorial fellowship at Fotogalleriet right now, which is a gallery in Oslo, and we'll be curating an exhibition that opens in 2025. So that's kind of what I'm working towards this year.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then you also have a monthly, or not monthly, you have a column in...
Yeah, I have a column in Billedkunst, so I've actually got a piece of writing in that number right there.
And it's for free today,
Yeah.
so grab your copy before you leave.
So every issue.
Yeah.
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 I did see a hand. Did I?
Hi, I'm Christine. I'm actually from the same... You're from the... Did you grow up in the United States? Wait.
Yeah, I grew up in Florida.
Okay. You'll recognize this. It's a commentary in the form of a poem. It's called These Truths. And with your American references, I think you'll understand it more than most people here. So just a moment. I had to borrow somebody's Instagram because I don't have them. These truths self-evident we were told to hold. But can we forgive for others the lies our teachers told? How the Almighty himself had given us this land to the white who thought it their right by God's almighty right hand. And I read of the love of Christ, and I read of war after war, and I heard the hymn sung aloud, ain't gonna study war no more, and glory, glory, hallelujah, still sometimes marches on within my soul. But it's that part about the truth that turns my mind as black as coal. For we speak of right and we speak of wrong, that our way's the best that we've known all along, that what we built was on the back of the poor, for it seemed good to us to just take a little more. Built upon the bones of tribes and the bodies of slaves. No food today, but the Bible will show that Jesus saves. We purged from history matriarchs, other genders and sexes, and when we made him sign it away, his mark was just X's.
Wow. Thank you. Who wrote that?
That's mine.
Oh, wow.
Oh, okay.
Oh, thank you for sharing.
God.
Wow.
Yeah, we got a film showing, a sharing session, and
This
a
is
little
amazing.
poetry reading today. We've had it
This is
all.
what I'm saying. We need to have these kind of sharing sessions. I really like this format.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you for an excellent film and such an intriguing discussion. I learned so much, so thank you so much for that. I wanted to ask you about building archives, right? I feel like in a way your mother wasn't just a research librarian. On top of that, she was an archivist, right? And I feel like I see some of that in your work too. Can you give us some advice or some ideas about building alternative archives?
So I'm really still very much learning. One of the things that I've been learning in terms of alternative archives, queer archives, DIY archives. That's something that's really been important to me, that the collection of materials can be something that's important to you. Like, that really didn't resonate with me, even while making this film. It wasn't really until after making this film that I realized that, oh, you know, the creation of these archives could be something very unique, very personal and private. And it doesn't have to be large. It could be small, and it could be on one person. I have a friend who is an archivist of an Black American musician named Ruth Reese, who moved to Oslo in the 60s. And she dedicates a large part of her life to just collecting little tidbits and information about this one person. And I think what a beautiful tribute to this person's life, to, you know, to honor them just by collecting those small things. So that's really what I'm learning. And one of the things that I'm trying to remind myself of is I don't have to collect everyone's story. That was a big fear for me, in terms of, you asked, you know, how do you feel, you know, you can represent people, and I want to try to show the multiplicity of queer Blackness. And, you know, for this film, I remember being very sad and disappointed that I only got 3 interviews. But it was enough. It was enough to make this film, and then I'll keep going. So yeah, thank you for that question. So lovely.
I also think it's important to notice that telling your private or personal stories, you're making a huge contribution to the bigger story, to the bigger picture. And I think that's also very important for us Norwegian to grasp that there's a different story out there, and also a very important one.
Yeah.
I would like to know, could you tell a little bit more about your PhD project?
Yes, of course. And I just want to say, one of the things that I love about Norwegian culture is the connection to the actual culture. One of the things that's really sad about American culture is because there's so many different immigrants that came to America, you know, when people came over on transatlantic ocean liners and people were forcibly coming over, but people who migrated to America, people from different countries in Europe, and over time they kind of lost their cultural identity, and it became this flat,
the melting pot.
Yeah, and it became this flat thing of these different races, white people, when it's not true. You know, there's so many different beautiful cultures, and because we don't have national dress, so I love seeing all the different national dresses.
Yeah,
in
like
Norway,
the bunad
and how they represent all the different parts of the country. And I love that, you know, people, that the government, from what I've seen and heard in my short time here, like really makes a strong initiative to keep the regional accents in the news. I think that's so cool. We don't do that in America. Like, you have to. It would be very shocking to hear people of different accents that are considered less than. Same in the UK. There's one accent. It's the posh British accent. You wouldn't hear Cockney accents on the news. But the PhD research, I'm researching grief and mourning practices. And African spirituality. And I will be interviewing Black people in the Nordics, so across all the Nordic countries, on their current grief practices, if they have any death or grief practices, and then their ancestral grief practices. So if they know of their parents' grieving practices. Yeah.
I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. But thank you all for coming. This is really lovely. Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.